welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again, this time going back to a forgotten album, an album that I probably haven't listened to in, oh god, it's got to be at least 15 years. I'm talking about Dream Theater's Train of Thought from November 11th, 2003. And boy, do I have some thoughts on this one. But before we talk all things Dream Theater, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I've been looking forward to this one for a while because this kind of marks like an interesting time in my fandom of this band. It also it should put Dream Theater in contention for most covered band on the podcast so far. If we count Change of Seasons, this is going to be our 7th full-length Dream Theater discussion.
And many more to go. And I say forgotten because it's kind of a controversial album. I think that one could argue that their heyday was ending around this time, but that in many respects they were actually gaining a lot more popularity around this time as well. So it's just a fascinating time for the band. But before we talk about that, I want to mention just a couple of things that kind of caught my ear this week. The first of which, Blackbriar, a band that I think we've referenced, but I don't know that we've talked a ton about. They released a new EP that I thought was fantastic. It's called Our Long Cursed Sleep. 4 tracks, really well done. I think it's some of the band's best material. So if you like their brand of, I'll just say, Within Temptation-inspired symphonic metal, you could do a lot worse than this one. Really, really good stuff. I thought that the first 2 or 3 tracks in particular were fantastic. So I'll post one of theirs this week. And another album by a band I had never heard of before was a band called Exploring Birdsong out of the UK. They're a progressive rock band, but it's really interesting stuff. As I would listen to it, it kind of sounded like some of the stuff that my kids listen to, like Olivia Rodrigo and stuff like that, which is not the point of the conversation, but there's just enough progginess here that I think it could attract some of the prog fans. It's really straddling that line of radio rock and progressive rock, but it kind of strikes a nice balance. And I found it to be just a really, really easy, interesting listen. So I wanted to mention that as well. Those 2 in particular was kind of what I spent a lot of the week on, along with 2 more extreme albums that I have a feeling we'll be talking about much more later this year when we do our best of 2026. I'm talking about Sidon, an album or a band that's out of Nashville, Tennessee. The album, wait for it, is called Fang Driller, Scars Beneath Memory's Wrist. Now, I had never heard of these guys, but I heard 1 or 2 tracks and I was absolutely blown away. It is, I'll call it progressive black metal, and it is just so interesting what these guys have done. I'm going to post one of their tracks as well this week. Just a really fascinating band, not to be outdone by another black metal band called Together to the Stars. They came out with an album called Iridescence, and I'll start by saying it's one of the most interesting album covers that I've seen this year, if for no other reason than it's just like this mellow shade of pink. Not sure what the thought was behind that, but it definitely struck a chord with me. They're out of Sweden, and I think I had even mentioned this to you because I thought that the music was just so good, despite the vocals being definitely harsh. Really, really interesting stuff from both of those bands, and 2 of the better albums that I've heard this year, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I did listen to that 1 track that you recommended, and I think the way that you premised it, I was like more nervous than I probably needed to be, and I actually ended up kind of enjoying it. So that's cool. Always look to you to find some of these more obscure bands and albums. So good stuff.
Definitely hit the spot, and we did, with nice contrast to Exploring Birdsong, which again is like progressive rock. Just I was all over the map this week. Did anything catch your ear, or what were you spending some time on?
I went back to the new Master Plan album. I had listened to it like a while back when we first got the promo for it, and the first time I listened to it, I thought it was just okay, and then I listened to it again after it was released, and again I thought it was just okay, a little underwhelming. But then when I went back to it, I think the third time, and I think I listened to it a fourth time as well, it really started to kind of click with me. And I know it's weird because I've seen a lot of people have mixed feelings about this. I've heard people say it was disappointing. I've heard people say it was just average. I've heard people say they really enjoyed it. I feel like I've felt all of those things in the course
at
of
one point or another.
Yeah, but I think that I'm landing on actually really enjoying it. So it's an album I plan on going back to a bunch of times more as we head towards the end of the year. I think sometimes it's just a little bit jarring, even after all these years, when it's not Jorn singing. It's kind of like that when you think about those first two albums and having like Uli, Roland, and Jorn all together. It's hard to kind of top that combination of musicians for me anyway. But I enjoy Rick's vocals. I feel like they're similar to Jorn's. I don't know that they're as dynamic, I guess maybe would be the word, but I still enjoy it. It's going to be kind of I think interesting to see if it makes my list at the end of the year. I feel like making the top 50 isn't going to be too difficult. Also, just there hasn't been a ton of stuff that I've been super, super excited about. That I'll also mention, I finally got to listen to the new Devin Townsend album, The Moth, which is I thought it was going to be like a double disc, long thing. It's just that there's a lot of tracks, but it does come in at about somewhere between 60 and 70 minutes or whatever. I found that it made for like really good background music, one of those things where I had it on while I was working and it just I got lost in it. I enjoyed his last album so much. I thought it was really well done and it was very tight. It wasn't as, I don't know what the right word is to describe this. It's just, it feels like there was, he was just doing a lot. And so definitely one listen is not going to be enough, I think, to, digest all of that album. Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've gotten, I've come from not being a fan of Devin Townsend at all to actually quite enjoying whenever he releases something. It's just, what was the other thing? Didn't he release an album, not the last one, but the other one? It was they were two full-length albums at the same time or whatever. And it's it's a lot. It's just a lot to digest. And when we're not covering it for the podcast and listening to it every day for a week, it's hard to really get a good feel for it. So I'm going to try to go back to that again. I just don't know how, I feel like when there's that many songs, it's hard to really remember certain songs. Things tend to stick out less because there's so much of it. So I don't know, maybe I need to go back and just listen to the songs that are longer than 3.5 minutes and kind of cut out some of the segue-ish type stuff. But, that's really it. I spent a lot of time listening to this Dream Theater album, pretty much making up for lost time because I didn't listen to it really very much when it came out. It was it's the first Dream Theater album I didn't buy a physical copy of. I had 6 Degrees, and I think that was the last physical Dream Theater album that I purchased until they started releasing Blu-rays and stuff. I don't know that I have any of their studio albums on physical disc after 6 Degrees. But I mean, it kind of matches with the time where I wasn't really getting anybody's CDs anymore. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion because especially this time period is always really interesting to me because the both of us kind of were at a fork in the road, so to speak, in our lives because, I left for college, you stuck around home, my music journey, I think strayed from yours until it kind of recrossed in 2009. So I love talking about albums from this time because I don't know the story of when you got this album, what you thought of it when it came out, where you got it, like, so, and I'm sure you remember all that stuff. So I look forward to hearing about all of that. Yeah, this is one I've had it marked in my head as something I was looking forward to, because we've had 2 people request it, and so I knew it was only a matter of time. No pun intended. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this, and I've certainly gone on a journey of my feelings about this in the last week or so.
So I'm going to set the table this way and say that on the heels of 6 Degrees, I was just at the height of my Dream Theater fandom at that point. If they were in the tri-state area, I was going to see them. If they were playing multiple nights at the Beacon Theater, I was seeing every show. At the time, I mentioned this, I had gotten a promo for 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And so I was plugged in. I was listening to this stuff like crazy. And obviously I was very excited. I had seen them multiple times in 2002. And then this album comes out November 11th of 2003. I don't think it's much of a surprise, but it's James LaBrie on vocals, John Mayung on bass, John Petrucci on guitars, Mike Portnoy on drums, and Jordan.
I've never heard of any of these people.
Keyboards. Yeah, I mean, it's probably for the first time that you're hearing these names, but I mention it just for the record. But I say that all to say I was massively excited for this album's release. That being said, I got this album the day it came out, as I did for every Dream Theater album, and I played the shit out of this thing, driving to and from college every single day. I must have listened to this thing for a month straight. I listened to it day and night, and the reason I kept listening to it is because I didn't like it, and I was hoping it was going to get better for me. And as a result of it never clicking for me, I kind of always said it's a 2-song album. I thought the last 2 songs were fantastic. I recognized their greatness. I would put them up with all the other wonderful Dream Theater songs in the back catalog. But I thought that at the time the first 5 songs were kind of a miss to varying degrees. Some were okay, some were not okay, etc.
And I'll interrupt you really quick just to say that, like, I feel like there were people that had similar opinions of Parasomnia, and that, like, they really liked the last 2 songs, and the rest of the album they were just kind of like, they kind of shrugged at. So
I think that's fair. And as I'm playing this thing over and over again, it's just not clicking. And eventually, obviously, I pick up every other album that the band would release, and I continue to do so to this day. But I always ranked this album amongst the worst of the Dream Theater albums because it was just so unbalanced. And the word I would use traditionally to describe it is forced.
Oh, sorry.
Not yet. Well, no, it just didn't appeal to me. It felt like they were trying to appeal to the times. This is on the heels of the new metal era. Linkin Park, I think, is probably a big thing around this time. And I kept hearing shades of bands like that in this album, and it wasn't the Dream Theater that I kind of grew up loving, and so I just completely summarily dismissed it. And I knew he would cover it, and I was glad to kind of go back and have another one of those sessions where I could just kind of binge listen to this thing. And so I know that I'm kind of in the minority. There's a lot of people that love this album. I'm going to read a quote from one of the people that requested it, Charles Florio, who had this to say. Obviously a contrasting opinion to mine in 2003. He says, I love Train of Thought. It's one of my favorite releases from DT. It's their metal album. If memory serves me right, the metal aspect of the album was inspired when Mike and John attended a Pantera concert, but I'm not 100% sure of that. The dark and heavy vibe really appealed to me, and some of the songs still appear in the band's live shows. Songs like As I Am, This Dying Soul, and Endless Sacrifice are some of my all-time favorite Dream Theater songs. I do understand the prog fans feeling left out with this release, but there are prog elements on the album, and there's plenty of prog in the band's catalog to keep people happy. I really love all of the tracks on this. My favorite is In the Name of God, a brilliant song. For me, it's 10 due to the heaviness, the darkness, and the dirty vibe that they wanted. Mission accomplished. And they definitely definitely were going for heavy on this album. There's no doubt. And you can even tell by looking at the album cover, something that we don't often talk about, but the album cover is dark. It's bleak. It's haunting in a way. It's definitely heavy. And I think that it's definitely something that I said deliberate, forced, whatever you want to call it. They were going for a heavier vibe on this one. But I was happy to go back to it this week.
To your point about the artwork, it reminds me again a lot of Parasomnia. I feel like there's a lot of parallels for me between this and their most recent album, and I'll kind of mention them as we go along. I have two questions for you on the onset here. One of them is, do you remember like buying the album, like where you got it and like, or was it like just a mail in and just showed up at your house one day? Do you remember like going to the store and buying it? This isn't one of those albums that you would have had to go to Slip Disc for. Like you could have just gone to any record store and got it. Do you have any recollection of like, did you buy it the day it came out? Like
I did, and memory serves, I think it was a Tower Records purchase, if I'm not 100% certain. I just want to make one note that before the album came out, and this was fantastic, Dream Theater was really leaning into the social media or internet thing that was going on in 2003. So they posted a very short snippet of, I don't know if it was notes or just something on a whiteboard. And what they did is they had fans basically create the instrumental track, which we'll obviously get into. And the following year, after the album's release, they actually released a full album, 7 songs, with 7 instrumental versions of what people thought Stream of Consciousness was going to sound like. And I always thought that was amazing. And it's 2 bands and I think like 5 solo artists, but one of the bands was Redemption.
Okay.
So you got to hear Redemption's version of what they thought Stream of Consciousness was going to be like based on Portnoy's notes. And I always found that fascinating. And just hearing like, a little taste of what they thought the album was going to be like. But to answer your question, I don't have an independent recollection, but I believe I got it at Tower the day. I know it was the day it came out. I believe it was at Tower.
Okay, cool. And my other question is, do you feel like 6 Degrees previewed any of this album at all? Do you think that there was stuff on 6 Degrees that would lead you to believe that this album was a natural progression? Or do you think that they like really did a 180 on their sound? Because the more I listen to this album, the more I kind of picked up on stuff that reminded me of both stuff I remember from Scenes from Memory and 6 Degrees, kind of mixed with some other elements that we hadn't heard Dream Theater do. But there were also like keyboard passages and riffs that reminded me quite a bit of Scenes from Memory at times. But I think that might just be the Jordan Rudess effect. But I was just curious if, like, in retrospect, do you feel like it's kind of a natural progression or a real turnaround?
I don't hear much of Scenes from a Memory at all on this album. I do hear quite a bit of The Glass Prison, and that stands to reason given that track 2, This Dying Soul, is the continuation of The Glass Prison. So that doesn't surprise me. But I don't know that I hear much else of 6 Degrees on this particular album. I always felt it to be kind of a jarring transition, despite the fact that the album kind of starts and picks up where 6 Degrees left off. And we get that with the first track. But I never felt that there was much continuity other than that little bit between the two.
Okay, that's fair. I was just picking up little things that reminded me of the Jordan Rudess era, which, at this point in time, really, it was still pretty fresh. They'd only released 2 albums with him. And I think that, in a lot of ways, if you look at, Change of Seasons notwithstanding, if you look at the difference between the band, between Awake and Scenes from Memory, I kind of am going to consider like Change of Seasons and Falling into Infinity like outliers, just because one was an EP and one was kind of like a weird transitional period for the band. But like when you compare the like Awake and Scenes from a Memory, like I feel like those albums might be more different from one another than 6 Degrees and Train of Thought.
I never thought about it, but to their credit, and I'll throw Falling Infinity into the mix, Images and Words doesn't sound like Awake. Awake doesn't sound like Falling into Infinity. Falling into Infinity doesn't sound like Scenes. So they really kind of kept zigging and zagging their whole way through. And so to that point, again, I don't think that I don't hear much of it, but there is some continuity there. I never really thought about it that way, but they certainly zig and zag in the back catalog. I think, ironically, after this album, I think a lot of their stuff started sounding very samey to me. That's the real interesting thing. After this album, they would go on a run of albums, and I would continue this into the Mangini era, where they started sounding very similar. Everything after this, in many respects, not to say that there aren't good songs or bad songs. I'm just saying that I think that there's a sameness to their style after this album.
So for on the other side of the coin, do you feel like anything that was new on Train of Thought kind of seeped in going forward?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not saying that it was a dead ringer, but there are parts of This Dying Soul and Endless Sacrifice that I think could have easily been on any album since then. Not so much some of the other songs, but those two in particular, I hear a lot of in the modern catalog.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Although, to be honest, like my knowledge of Dream Theater is much deeper when you go prior to this album versus after it. And we're going to pretty much catch up on Dream Theater albums in real time via this podcast over the next several years. And this is really kind of the start of it for me. This was really the first album that I didn't listen to. You know, you had said you listened to the hell out of it when you got it. This was the first album that I really did not. And I don't know, I can't remember if I listened to it like once or twice and it just wasn't my thing. And in 2003, I don't know that I was listening to very much metal anyway. So like, I don't know. I just know that this was the point in time where I was like, this is the first time I feel like Dream Theater has disappointed me or fell short of what was, incredibly high expectations. But, when you look at the catalog of work up to that point, I mean, how does anybody continue banging out, records of that quality, time and time again? It's just that they really burned hot at the beginning. And I think that they had a really big renaissance with Scenes and with Rudis joining the band after, I think, some people might say they lost their way on Falling into Infinity. You could go back to episode 4, I think it was, where we covered that album. And I think that we both kind of gave it more credit than I think a lot of people have over the years. But they're such a fascinating band to kind of talk about, and we've kind of bounced around rather than go chronological. So
hell, we still haven't done the debut. I mean, we haven't done When Dream and Day Unite, so we'll have to go back to that. And then obviously there's a lot of the newer stuff in between this and the last album. Yeah,
I'm really excited. I honestly, this Train of Thought and Dream and Day Unite are two of the episodes I'm most excited about. So probably next year it'll probably be a good time to if we don't go with something else. I mean, I've heard people that have so many like good things to say about Octavarium and Systematic Chaos and stuff like that. And it's going to be going forward. Like I'm going to remember the songs they made like music videos for, and that's going to be it. And so it's really a lot of that stuff's going to be like listening to it for the first time outside of, the plethora of live DVDs and Blu-rays that I think I've watched every one they've made other than maybe the most recent one. And a lot of times, like I'll put them on and be like, yeah, I don't know half of these songs because I didn't really bother to listen to the new albums more than like once or twice. God, the Astonishing, I don't think I ever even listened to the whole thing. Ever. Like
I am not looking forward to that episode.
I'll
be honest.
That might be the only Dream Theater album that exists that there are songs that I've never heard before.
I don't know that you're wasting your time. I think I cannot get into that album. And I will say that this is definitely better than that. And I actually have had a bit of an epiphany this week. So if that was part of the purpose of this, mission accomplished. Ironically, not a ton of songs on the album because in typical Dream Theater fashion, they're all long, or at least long enough. And I say that because 4 or 5 of these tracks are well over 10 minutes apiece. And then you've got one transitional track in a sense. And of course the opener, As I Am. And so I think with that, let's kind of get into it.
Nothing over 15 minutes though.
Yeah, that's true. They keep it consistent if nothing else. As I Am is one of the more interesting tracks in the discography, not only because it kicks off this album, but to Charles's point, they continue to play it live. And I was so sick of this song that it was the kind of thing where if they were playing it at a concert, I would just like go to the bathroom because I was just kind of over it. I was just sick of the song. But the last time, or one of the last times I saw them, I heard the song and I'm like, you know what? It's not as bad as I used to give it credit for. And so in that sense, there was almost opening the door to the possibility that I was missing out on a track that I had always just kind of glossed over and just disregarded. I always like the way that the song starts with the bass and the dark keys and the guitars and the drums finally coming in behind them. I thought the intro to this track is phenomenal. And then I don't know if I would say it's the best part of the song, the intro, but around 1 minute and 15 seconds, it starts to pick up. The verses are good and the chorus is pretty good too. I don't know that I would consider either one of them to be great. I don't know if it's studio magic or whatnot, but Labrie sounds good, and so does the overall mix. Although it's dark and different, Ma Young's bass pops on this album, and I love the fact that you can hear him loud and clear. This song always felt like a single to me, and I'd argue they go back to the well to it too many times live, but at the same time, there's elements of this song that I adore. After the guitar solo, there are some drum fills that Portnoy just beats the hell out of the drum kit. I think it's fantastic, some of those drum fills. And if there was no doubt that they were going for a metal vibe, and I don't know that you find it any more clearer than on this particular track, it's better than I gave it credit for. It's a good song, maybe a very good song with a really nice cadence to it. I don't know that I would say it's a great song, just better than I remember.
Do you remember hearing it before the album came out? Because it was a single that was released about a month before the album came out.
I have no recollection, but it's entirely possible. And I say that because I feel like I just heard so much of this album around that time that I feel like I did. And it makes sense that it would be released as a single. It's by far the best choice for that, even though I would argue that there's much better material on the album.
Yeah, they had made it. There was a 4.5 minute radio edit. I am pretty sure I heard the song ahead of the album because going back to the album, it was the song that I just recognized the most. That also could have been just because I listened to the first song and gave up a lot of times. I don't really know. I just remember not really being a big fan of the song. And I have to say, the last week or so has probably been the most I've ever enjoyed it. And it's almost like the more and more I go back to it. And this is kind of a metaphor or whatever for the whole album, I guess. It's probably the wrong word, but like, I think that like, and this is going to echo a little bit of what we talked about with Rage for Order last week with Queensryche. It feels like it was last year. Like, I feel like going into listening to this album without any sort of expectations changed how I vibed with it. And so like this song being one of those things is that like knowing what I was expecting made me, I think, enjoy it more and not disappointed that it wasn't more proggy or more, images or awake or scenes or change of seasons or whatever. It almost harkened back to like a song like The Mirror on Awake, where it's just a very heavy, guitar forward driving song.
And it's not the heaviness that used to bother me, because I love Awake. I would put it right up there with Images and Words, as we did when we spoke about it. But I just thought that there was a lack of creativity in some of the songwriting on a song like this. But the reality is, I'll give credit where credit is due. I've come around on it. Again, do I think it's the best song on the album? I don't. But I can understand why people like it. I can understand why people love it. And it does make for a very good single and a very good opening track for what it is. It's just that there's a couple of monsters on here that obviously we'll get to. But it's like I said, good to very good. I don't know that I would say it's a great song.
Is it the right choice for the first song?
100%.
Yeah, I think so too. I think
you can't start this album any other way.
Yeah, I think it sets the tone. It's insanely one of the shorter songs on the album outside of the 3-minute Vacant. It's for all the reasons you mentioned. I am probably more of a fan of the song than I ever have been. It's not my song of the week or anything, but I just feel differently about it, and I definitely I don't know. I feel like I've come around on a lot of stuff on this album, and this is really step one, so to speak. And one of the things I always thought was cool, I found this out a few years later after the fact, was that, you know, Dream Theater was doing this thing where the beginning of an album would start with like some sort of key or something that was, or note from the last note of from the previous album. And it created almost like this giant loop, I guess, where the end of the 42-minute 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence song, that the same chord that ends that song is the chord that opens As I Am. And then at the end of In the Name of God, that last faint piano note would be the first piano note in Octavarium, which is the following album. I forgot how many albums they did that. I know that they stopped at a certain point, but this had gone on. I believe it started with Scenes, where the end of Scenes, where you hear that kind of record, the needle scratching the record pretty much at the end, and you hear that record kind of, you know, like the end of a record where it's just kind of making that hissing sort of noise. That's how Glass Prison starts at the beginning of 6 Degrees. Really cool thing. I don't know of very many other bands that did something like that. And I guess just to add a little bit of color to the writing of this opening track, there's a story that during the 2003 summer tour where they were playing with Queensryche guitarist Mike Stone tried to give John Petrucci tips on playing guitar. I'm sure that was met with a lot of appreciation, to say the least. But it led to Petrucci writing the lyric, "Don't tell me what's in, tell me how to write," and that's kind of funny. So interesting. It's also interesting to note that they recorded this album in 3 weeks, or that it was written in 3 weeks, I should say. Like they churned this one out super fast.
And I think that lends itself to the fact that it's a little more straightforward. I mean, again, by their standards, of course. I think that most bands would listen to this and be like, I can't play that. And then them, you know, but still, it's not the Dance of Eternity. Let's call it for what it is.
It's the idea that they wrote all this in 3 weeks is mind-boggling to me. Like, I couldn't do any of this in a lifetime. So I think that credit to where credit is due on this one. But interesting opener. I think that we're going to start exploring a little bit more, I think, of Dream Theater's proggier side with some of the following tracks. But As I Am, I really is just a almost 8-minute, just heavy, a pretty straightforward heavy metal track. Not a ton of prog elements.
No, you're going to get more prog on this Dying Soul, the next track. And like I said, this is kind of the sequel to The Glass Prison, which, by the way, talk about a phenomenal tune. The Glass Prison is just a phenomenal tune. I think this Dying Soul is not as good as The Glass Prison, but at the same time, just as heavy. And the guitar work on this song is just absolutely mind-boggling. It reminds me a lot of Home in many respects. There's parts of this song that I do hear, I guess, on scenes in that sense, but that's about it. The verses are okay. I don't know that they're really special, but the bass sound, again, just really pops through. A little too much rap in the backing vocals for my taste. I understand why they're there, but I feel like, again, they're just leaning too much into that nu metal sound for me. It's a bit of a slog, I think, believe it or not. I think that it's not my favorite Labrie performance, and that's part of the problem that I had with it. Fantastic piano solo in the first instrumental section, and the really solid bridge as well. And I like some of the callbacks to the Glass Prison. That's a phenomenal touch. But I just think it's less than the Glass Prison and not my favorite song on the album.
This is part of what is known as Mike Portnoy's 12-step suite, and he performed this with his what is it called, the
Shattered Fortress,
Shattered Fortress band, which was essentially Haken, and so it was cool to hear these songs that were essentially one song per album, starting with 6 Degrees. And getting to play it all out the way that it was meant to be compiled, because there's 12 steps in the 12-step program for alcoholism, and so within these 5 songs there's 12 parts. Glass Prison has the first 3 parts. This Dying Soul has the next 2. I think that I must have remembered this song a little bit more than I thought I did because of prepping for that Shattered Fortress set at Prague Power, because this song kind of rang a little bit more familiar. And I have to say, after listening to it a bunch of times this past week, this is another one that's kind of grown on me. I really didn't care for it at the beginning of the session of listening to this album, but it really grew on me. I think that Brutus's keyboards are very distinct and and again, like you said, definitely Home is the right call from Scenes, because I think, that's arguably one of the heaviest songs on that album, and that would be considered probably a softer track on this album, oddly enough. I didn't mind so much of the kind of that like echoey, I know there's a name for the technique, but like that vocal technique where it sounds like Labrie is singing into a megaphone. Doesn't sound so much as rapping to me, which we'll get to, but more so like kind of just like talking quickly into a megaphone while there's like this, chugging guitar riff and heavy drum going on and whatever. I don't know that it necessarily needed to be as long as it is, but I found myself kind of enjoying it actually after a while. It was probably like one of my least favorite songs going into this week, and
better than I remember it, just not stellar. To be clear, but not the worst song on the album. There's a song that I think is pales in comparison.
I think we'll probably agree on that too.
I think we will. It's not the next one, Endless Sacrifice, though. Endless Sacrifice is another song that I would say is pretty good. The guitars at the beginning really kind of lend itself to a ballady sound. Really good intro, I have to say. I enjoy the keys. This was a song that the more I heard it this week, the more I kind of remembered it. I like the verses. I like them a lot. And especially those first 2 minutes of this song, I'm on board this train, no pun intended. The chorus is really where they have that metal sound, really nu metal. And it kind of, again, it sounds a little bit forced, like they're trying to be Linkin Park or something like that. But I like the strings. I think that they add a really nice dimension to this track. I just think the reason why I don't love the song is I think it's one of the weaker choruses. Solid instrumental section, a good track. Again, not great, but good. There's elements here that I really do enjoy.
I like the back and forth between like the really, like pensive verses where it's very like almost thoughtful and slow and it's I am known for giving Labrie a hard time, particularly because I just don't think he's a very good live singer anymore. But like on these studio albums, I enjoy his vocals a lot. Because they harken back to albums that were so important to me, like Images and Words and Awake, and even Falling into Infinity, which was one of the first metal albums I ever owned. So I'm just get that out of the way right now. That like I've always been a fan of Labrie's vocals. When in a studio or in the early days of his live performances, I find that it's almost difficult to listen to him sing live at times nowadays. So anyway, interrupting my own thought, I like that it goes back and forth from that to like a really crunchy and heavy, riffy chorus. I think I probably enjoy the chorus a bit more than you do. And then like halfway through the song, it's just your usual Dream Theater noodling, keys and guitars and lots of soloing and all good stuff. This probably was my biggest surprise on the album, I think, just because I ended up enjoying it more than I could possibly ever remember enjoying it. I remembered it very vaguely, like I think I knew all the songs on the album a little. But yeah, this one was kind of took me by surprise how much I ended up enjoying it the more and more I heard it.
I have to throw it back to you. The middle of this album features a 10-minute plus song called Honor Thy Father. It starts off with a really heavy sound. The drums are in your face. This song is very technical. It's very heavy. But what are your thoughts on Honor Thy Father?
The first time, if you recall last week, I had said yuck. And that was mostly in reference to the parts on this song where James Labrie was doing his best Limp Bizkit impression, I guess. I don't know if he heard Fred Durst and was like, this is mind blowing. I need to do this myself. But really, really off putting, especially after not hearing it for many, many, many years. That said, it's not really a massive part of the song. And so I found that I didn't really mind the rest of the song that much, but I feel like that really kind of drags it down a little bit because I feel like more than at any point on this album, it feels like Dream Theater is trying to be something that they really aren't. Yeah. But then again, like, I don't know. I think of like Roll the Bones by Rush where like, was that Getty or Neil Peart who did that like rap section of, and like
I know what you're talking about.
In retrospect, I hear it and I'm like, all right, it's kind of silly, but like it's through the joy of time, I guess. I look back on it with more like fond memories, I guess. I don't know, whatever. It's weird and it's off-putting and it doesn't feel like it belongs here. I don't know that the song as a whole is really that bad of a song, but that part of it is just really sticks out to me.
I have no issue with heavy music. If I want to listen to heavy music, I'll listen to death metal or I'll listen to black metal. I felt like this song is just heavy for the sake of being gratuitously heavy. And the rapping doesn't work for me, and it takes me out of the song in many respects. I think the Limp Bizkit comparison is actually a good one. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. When I really think about this song in the greater picture of things, I even struggle with it more because I'm like, this is the same band that we're learning to live. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But there's parts of the album that aren't like the bridge isn't terrible, just doesn't save the song for me. And I think the instrumental section is pretty good too. It's just too long for what it is. And I almost feel like it's edgy for no reason. It just sounds forced. So this is the one song where I really, again, with retrospect, I wound up liking more of this album than I thought, but this one still hasn't connected with me.
Well, Mike Portnoy wrote this as a hate song, so maybe it just worked out that way
Mission
for you
accomplished.
as well. Yeah, he wrote this song about his stepfather. So interesting there. Obviously, wasn't a big fan of his stepfather, clearly, but there is one part I really enjoy towards the end of the song during the solo where Petrucci and Rudis kind of play together instead of doing kind of like a back and forth. It's like they kind of do almost like a duet, and it sounds really cool. So yeah, I don't hate this song, but it's probably my least favorite song on the album. It'd probably be between this and As I Am, honestly. I just think that the other songs are better.
I will say, and I said at the outset that I always thought this was a 2-song album. At a bare minimum, I was wrong because of this next track. Back in I don't know that I ever realized how good Vacant was until this week. So if for no other reason, I've done a complete 180 on this track, but I'll tell you one story. Back in April of 2004, Dream Theater played the theater at Madison Square Garden, a venue that holds about 4,500 people. I guess now it would be kind of small by their standards, as they play venues that are much bigger than that. But what I thought was awesome was, as much as I was not really a fan of the album at the time, check out this second set. They played, after an intermission, they played A Change of Seasons, Caught in a Web, Honor Thy Father, and then they come out with Eugene Friesen, who helped actually write, I think, this song, or at least perform on it on the album. And they played Vacant and Stream of Consciousness on as like back to back, but with the cello. And I thought it was sick. And then they ended with In the Name of God. So you got to hear basically this whole album, just not straight through, because the first set they played the rest of it. Say that all to say, Vacant is one of the best songs on the album. And the only reason, I guess, that it kind of gets overshadowed is because of what comes after it. It's really good. I mean, really, really good. It's almost like 2 separate albums, because Vacant and everything that comes after it sounds so different from the stuff that comes before it. But the album needed a ballad, and this is it. The vocals are great. The piano is great. The strings are fantastic. And I always think of that show when I hear this song, because I remember the crowd popping like crazy when the cello came out.
This has got me wanting to go back and watch the Live at Budokan DVD, which I think was the first DVD they released after this album came out. And so there's a good bit of tracks from this on there. So that aside, the more and more I listen to the song, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, it's a very emotional song. And when you come to find out that it was inspired by James LaBrie's daughter, who fell into a coma after an unexpected seizure before her 7th birthday. It reminded me kind of when we saw Wolverine do that acoustic set, and they were telling us like the stories about like one of the guys didn't know if like his kid was going to be born healthy, and like it's like, wow, that's really heavy stuff. Musically, I feel like there are precursors to Stream of Consciousness inside Vacant,
yes,
where, in ways it very much can feel like its own song, but also in a lot of ways it feels like a bit of an intro to Stream of Consciousness.
And that's why I think I always conflated this as a 2-song album, because I always just thought this was an intro track. But it does have a standalone redeeming quality to it, which, again, it's not my song of the week. Obviously, it's going to be one of the last 2 tracks at this point, but I'll be damned. It's a really awesome song, and it's like breaks up the album in such a way where you finally take a breath after this oral onslaught that the last 40 minutes provided.
I think that's really well said. And I wanted to just circle back. I forgot to mention something about Honor Thy Father, and it's something that Dream Theater has been known to do over the years, and it's to use like clips from movies and TV shows and stuff. And so there's stuff from the movie Magnolia and At Close Range and Ordinary People, the Royal Tenenbaums, and stuff from the TV series Oz. So it's interesting that I always wondered, like, what about the certain scenes, like, inspired. I'm guessing Mike Portnoy had more of the creative hand on that song. So I'm wondering, like, if those movies had any sort of special meaning, and that's why he used them in there. But it's an interesting way to like to make the solo sections in particular feel a little bit more unique and not just feel like another 3 minutes of the guys in Dream Theater performing their instruments really well, which everyone knows they're very capable of doing. And I think it adds a little bit of a layer to the song. Might not be some people's favorite thing in the world, but I think it adds a little bit of a change of seasons. I don't know, change of sound, I guess. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
I think you're right. I have always said that In the Name of God, the last track, was far and away the best song on the album. However, after listening to Stream of Consciousness several times this week, I'm doing a 180. In the Name of God is still a fantastic Dream Theater track. But Stream of Consciousness, this 11-minute and 16-second instrumental track, is spectacular. I want to give it a listen. It's my song of the week. Good luck picking a minute of it. And then we'll come back. I'll kind of walk you through my methodology, and I want to know if it's the same thing for you or if you went with the final track here. But let's give Stream of Consciousness a listen. So I went with Stream of Consciousness because as much as I always enjoyed the song, it just hit me in all the right spots this particular week. And again, I think the final track is phenomenal, a phenomenal end. But Stream of Consciousness is like the consummate instrumental, not blazing fast, but filled with emotion, awesome string sections. And I think the strings just lend so much to the track. Myung's bass is really, really powerful. You can almost feel it. And I think back to seeing it live, and it was almost like resonating inside of you. And really just some of the most absurd guitar solos that are beyond words and beyond reproach. And then, of course, Jordan Rudess has that unmistakable keyboard sound. What I love about this song are the changes of pace. And then ironically, when you think it's over, the last 2 minutes are even better than the 9 minutes that preceded it. It is just vintage Dream Theater. And again, it's preceded by a wonderful track that leads into it, and then you get into the strong finale. I just thought it's perfectly placed just the same. I love this song.
Yeah, as soon as it came on the first time this week, I'm like, why the hell is this song so familiar to me? And then I remembered, actually I had to reach out to Mike to confirm, but I was like, did you use this song in a Power Hour video once? And even he wasn't sure. And then he remembered he had said it, and obviously not the full song, but I guess the first minute or two to a hockey compilation video. And boy, did it fit really well. And so that like first minute or two, like was just really just all came rushing back to me. But man, this whole song, like you said, is an unbelievable instrumental journey. If you're not a fan of LaBrie's vocals, this is the track for you because he's nowhere to be found. I think it
reminds me of Liquid Tension Experiment, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you considering the people involved, I mean, it makes complete sense. It almost reminds me in a lot of ways of, what was the instrumental track from Scenes from Memory?
Dance of Eternity?
Yeah. Not so much with like that kind of circusy part, but just a lot of just instrumentation and just guys really good at what they do, doing their thing. But I think this is even better. And to make an 11-minute instrumental and not have any point where you're like bored or waiting for it to end.
It doesn't drag.
Yeah.
It goes by so fast. Like, it's fantastic.
It's really impressive. So I actually had every intention of choosing Stream of Consciousness as my song of the week, in fully expecting you to choose In the Name of God. But since you went the other way, I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to choose In the Name of God as my song of the week. I just really enjoyed both of these tracks equally. And you throw Vacant into the mix, and this last half hour or so is really some of the best like just stuff I've heard Dream Theater do. So why don't we give a little bit of this In the Name of God a listen, and we will hear your thoughts on this, the longest track on the album of 14 minutes and 17 seconds, In the Name of God.
What an awesome way to close this album. It's the very low-end heavy, but it works so well. This is that perfect blend of heaviness and that headbanging, but a real toe-tapping melodic tune. And I thought that Labrie does a nice job of kind of blending emotion and anger. The strings, again, on this track really remind me a lot of Awake, because it's so subtle, but it adds such another element to the songwriting. And then, of course, that anthemic chorus just hits all the right spots. Love the different vocals in each ear when you're using headphones. And again, you have this low-key section in the middle before it builds back up to that climactic finish. Such a poignant tune, and certainly very timely today in many respects. But that said, it was always my favorite song. But this week, Stream of Consciousness just hit a little bit harder, but it's clutching at straws. This is a really good song.
Best chorus on the album, I think. Great solo work. Again, another 14 plus minute Dream Theater song where I feel like it doesn't really drag at any point. I think that it actually is more similar to Home than I think This Dying Soul. I think you had mentioned earlier. There's some similarities. I think if you take away a little bit of that kind of like Arabic or Middle Eastern sound that Home had, this is a little bit more, I think, straightforward. But I would argue this might be a better song, in all honesty. At least I like it more, and it honestly made for, like, each time I would go back to the album and I'd listen to As I Am or Honor Thy Father, like I mentioned, like they were probably my two least favorite songs on the album. I always knew that there was some real greatness to look forward to at the end. And so in that respect, I feel like this album was paced and ordered pretty much as perfect as it could be without replacing, the songs with other songs. So really good stuff. This album really hit way better than I thought it was going to, and I always thought it was crazy that people loved it so much, and I it's a little less crazy to me after this week.
I agree with all that. Again, I'm not going to say it's my favorite album of theirs, but it's definitely better than I gave it credit for. And with that said, I think a nice way to summarize it is another blurb that we got, this one from Chris Calabrese. And he says the following. He says, I know it has mixed reviews and is controversial, but I listened to it a lot when it came out and during the years that followed. Admittedly, I listened twice this week, and it hasn't aged well for me. It's not a Labrie album. It's one of the worst if you want classic Labrie. He hates the rapping sections in some of the songs, and also Jordan's doing the turntable sounds. But Stream of Consciousness is my favorite track. Also really love this Dying Soul, Endless Sacrifice, Vacant, and the instrumental section in the Name of God. Not a fan of As I Am, and he says I can do without Honor Thy Father. I agree. But a lot of the album is too repetitive for my taste. It's definitely more metal than prog, but they were a metal band too. And I think the previous tracks like Fortune and Lies and The Mirror would have fit well on a record like this. I don't like it as much as Systematic Chaos, but I still go back and listen to it from time to time. And that's kind of how I felt about the album just overall. But even though he doesn't like it as much as he remembered it, I like it more than I remembered it. Again, it's not a 10, but it's certainly better than I ever gave it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, well put. I will throw in one last fun little thing that I learned on Wikipedia this week, and that there is a hidden composition buried in the Name of God that was undiscovered for over a year and a half. The band didn't tell anyone about it. Until Portnoy mentioned it in the drum cam from the Mike Portnoy Live at Budokan DVD, and this caused the Portnoy message board fans to scour the song looking for what it might be, and a fan going by the pseudonymous name Daryl Revek mentioned that from 551 to 607 there appeared to be Morse code audible, which Nick Bogovich, user handle Bogey, isolated and discovered that when translated to English, the phrase "eat my ass and balls" was the result. And this is apparently a well-known Mike Portnoy catchphrase. So, fun little anecdote and thing that, to be expected, I think, from a band like Dream Theater to throw in.
Only they can throw that in and have nobody realize for the longest time. I'm going to let you do the honors with this one. I'm really curious what you're giving this on a scale of 1 to 10.
This was kind of a hard album to give a number to, in all honesty. I feel like an 8 is just a smidge too high, honestly. So I'm going to land at a 7.875. It's the same rank, same rating I gave Rage for Order last week, but there's just, I think, so much good stuff to hold up the album's, like hold the album up into a higher than average, above average, but like not just slightly above average, but like fairly above average. But I still don't know that I want to put it in the 8 realm. I just think that some of the songs prior to the last 3 aren't like my favorite Dream Theater songs in the world. So that said, like I kind of was expecting to give this more closer to like a 6 or a 6.5. So this was way higher than my expectations were going into it.
I'm with you. It's a 7.5 for me. I probably would have said it's a 6 coming into it, and so markedly higher. And definitely better than average. I just couldn't approach an 8 though, because I look at the albums that I've given 8s to, and I prefer every one of them to this. But there's also more material on this than I ever appreciated in the past. So in that sense, it was a definite win for me.
The question remains, is there a bad Dream Theater album? And I know you have an answer to that. I am undecided. But so far, based on everything that we've reviewed up to this point, I think that this and Falling Into Infinity is probably our lowest rated Dream Theater. Falling Into Infinity, just to go back, I gave a 7.75 and you gave a 7.5. So these two were probably on the bottom end of our Dream Theater reviews up until this point. And in full disclosure, we both gave Images and Words a 10. So it's going to be interesting to talk about the remaining Dream Theater albums, of which there are many, but particularly for me, 6 Degrees and When Dream and Day Unite are two of the big ones. But, like I said earlier, like everything else, with the exception of Parasomnium, it's going to be almost like a first time experience for me. So I'm excited to continue digging into the discography. I almost feel bad that we've kind of really finished off the classic era of this band, depending on what years you place that era in. But I know my favorite Dream Theater albums have come and gone on this podcast. Although I don't know, I am a big fan of 6 Degrees, and there's a handful of songs on When Dream and Day Unite that I really like, in spite of a really rough sounding production. So, yeah. Food for thought at a later date.
Yes, indeed. Well said. Well said. Some news items. Last week, obviously, we talked about Queensryche. Michael Wilton says, quote, "We've managed to get a lot of really great demos recorded for their next studio album. So it sounds to me like at some point in 2027, we'll have new material from Queensryche. So that's always noteworthy. A band that is now about to release their 18th studio album, and that's Stryper, a band that I would love to cover at some point. Their new album, Throne of Thorns, is due out September 25th on Frontiers. So new music from them, and new music from Haken, a band that we mentioned earlier on the podcast. Their new EP, In a Fever Dream, is due out July 17th. And I've heard by all accounts that they're going in a bit of a different direction with this EP. So that should be interesting.
Very nice. Very nice.
So that brings us to next week, and I believe it is your choice. So I will throw it over to you. What are we listening to next week?
Well, you're wrong about one thing, because it's not my choice. It's your choice. I am going to give you 3 albums, and I'm going to let you decide what we discuss next week, and I'll explain why. I had an album in this slot for a while. And then we talked about another album off air, and that got me thinking. And then that album got me thinking about another album. The one common factor about these 3 albums is that they all feature the same vocalist, and that vocalist is Andre Matos.
Okay.
So here are your options, and I will give them to you in chronological order. Actually, no, I won't. I'll give them to you in this order. The album I initially had pegged was Shaman's debut album, Ritual, which came out in 2002. But then we started talking about Symphonia, which was the album that Timo Tolkki did with Andre Matos, Mikko Harkin, Jari Kanalainen, and Uli Kush. And it was like essentially a super band that released an album in 2011 and also then just kind of faded off. And then I started to think about an album that I never really listened to very much, but I know you love. And it's the Virgo album that Andre Matos did with Sasha Paeth back in 2001. And I found myself listening to tracks from all 3 of these albums, and I couldn't make a decision. So I am going to hand it over to you. I have a hunch at what you're going to pick, but I wanted to give you the option. I don't know if I've ever actually given you a series of choices before. So
I have Virgo on my list for later this year, so I'm not going to choose that. And I'm going to throw you another curveball. I'm going to pick another Matos album by a completely different band that's not on your list. So since you turned it over to me, we're going to go with something completely different. We're going to go with Theater of Fate, Viper's second album that predated Angel's Cry. So you want to give me the keys to the kingdom? I'll give you the keys to Matos, but we're not doing any of the albums you discussed.
Okay.
I've been wanting to choose Theater of Fate. It came out in 1989. I've been wanting to choose this album for a long time. Not to say that I didn't want to cover the rest of these albums, but I want to do some classic Viper material, which is basically where Angra plucked him from in the early 90s. This is their second album, and this is a really, really interesting release. There are some kind of crappy songs on here, but there's some really fantastic songs on here as well. So if you don't mind, I'm going to call a complete audible and pick a completely different Matos album.
That is very much okay with me. I am going to table Shaman for later in the year because I still want to talk about that album for sure. But
sure.
All right, I guess I was hoisted by my own petard, as they say.
I'm really going with the curveball in this one. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Please give us a like and a follow if you think we deserve it. Consider joining our Patreon. We appreciate all of you, and to all the new Patreon members, thank you for joining. We hope you like what you hear. Bonus episodes aplenty, and we may be doing the next one live and in person this weekend, but more on that to follow. Anything else from you, my friend?
I don't think so. I think I'm good. I'm glad to finally dig into Train of Thought, and I have to say I've definitely been ragging on it a little harder than I probably needed to over the years. It was partially ignorance and just not listening to it that much. But in all fairness, I probably having a much more narrow mindset and just enjoyability area for metal at this time. I probably just heard something different and immediately was turned off and called it a day. And so there's a lot of albums like that, probably way more so for me than for you. Good stuff. I look forward to circling back to Dream Theater at some point, and I'm glad we'll be talking about Andre Matos in some form or fashion next week. Just not quite what I was expecting, but that's cool because my knowledge base of this album revolves around one song that I know incredibly well, and I don't know anything else on the album. Maybe one other song, yeah, it's gonna take a lot for my song of the week to be unseated, just because I know
how good that song is. But there's other good stuff on here, I promise you.
Yeah.
Thanks again to everyone. We will catch you on the flip side. Enjoy the week.
Adios. Yeah, you too. See you in a couple of days.